Hi friends, this is Mark. Welcome back to the Denison Forum podcast. Before we dive into today's episode, we wanted to share some exciting news and a quick update. We're taking a short summer break for a few weeks, but don't worry, we've got you covered. We'll be presenting some of our most popular episodes featuring incredible guests like Dr. Stephen Meyer, Alistair McGrath, and others. We hope you enjoy these encore presentations and get a chance to revisit some of the powerful conversations that we've had. We'll be back in late July with brand new episodes, bringing you fresh conversations designed to equip you to think biblically, live holy, and serve intentionally. And let me ask you to mark your calendars. In August, we're thrilled to announce that the podcast will be rebranding under a new name, the Faith and Clarity Podcast. We'll be sharing more details about this exciting change in coming weeks, so stay tuned. Thanks for supporting the podcast and for being a part of our community. We wish you a fantastic summer, and always remember that Jesus wants you to live by faith, not by fear. Now, let's get to this encore presentation. Welcome back to the Denison Forum podcast. I'm Dr. Mark Terman, your host and Executive Director of Denison Forum. We appreciate you joining us for this conversation, for every conversation that we have here on the Denison Forum podcast about truth, about culture, about the intersection of faith and what's going on in our world today, answering hopefully questions that you have. Here in the fall, we're dealing with some of those issues that maybe you and your family may be encountering as kids go back to school, as college students start off into a new semester. Those things about where faith intersect with education, where they intersect with things like science and math and history. We're having those kinds of conversations today. And our guest today will be Dr. Jonathan Witt, who is the executive editor of Discovery Institute Press and a senior fellow and a senior project manager with Discovery Institute's Center for Science and Culture. He is the author of a number of books, including The Hobbit Party, The Vision of Freedom That Tolkien Got and the West Forgot. That was written with Jay Richards. He is also the lead writer and associate producer of a documentary called Poverty, Inc., which was the $100,000 Templeton Freedom Award recipient and has also been viewed and awarded 50 international festival honors. He additionally scripted 3 other documentaries that have aired widely on PBS and have been translated into multiple languages, airing around the world. Witt's academic essays have appeared in various periodicals, and he's been interviewed numerous times in both regional and national radio programs. He's a regular speaker for Discovery Institute's summer seminar on science and culture, and has spoken at a number of universities on a range of topics connected to political and economic freedom, cultural renewal, and the arts. Witt previously served as a tenured professor of literature and writing at Lubbock Christian University. He holds a PhD with honors in English and literary theory from the University of Kansas. Today, we're going to be talking with Dr. Witt about his book, A Meaningful World, How the Arts and Sciences Reveal the Genius of Nature. This book was written with Benjamin Whitaker or Benjamin Weicker, and gives an incredible insight into how the magnificence of our world and our pursuits academically point to this reality of genius, which ultimately points back to the ultimate genius of God. So we're excited for you to be a part of this conversation today. Thanks for joining us. Dr. Jonathan Witt, welcome to the Denison Forum podcast. We're glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, we got a lot of ground to cover. And just to remind our audience, we've been focused on educational type topics here in this season of the year as people go back to school, as college students, high school students, all across the ages, getting back into their classrooms, getting their textbooks, getting their assignments, firing up their computers, getting ready for what all of this school year is going to mean, both academically and socially. And so we wanted to talk to Dr. Witt and some others about how things like science and faith, and today, science, art, and faith, how those things are intertwined and how they intersect. And so As we get into that, Dr. Witt, wanted to see if you just tell us a little bit about your own journey of faith and how that worked out, and then how you ended up doing what you do now at the Discovery Institute.
Great question. I sometimes joke that I can get testimony envy because there are these beautiful, dramatic Paul on the road to Damascus testimonials. I was raised in the church, and as a kid, there was never some moment when I thought, "Oh, I'm an atheist, or I'm going to run away from God." I did have a period where I became, acutely aware of my sinfulness. I would say as I grew, for me, it was more getting a stronger sense of God's grace. That was key for me. In terms of intellect, the intellectual part of the journey, one thing I didn't struggle with was as I began to see some of the evidence in nature and the history of biology, that certain things that maybe didn't fit as obviously into certain ways of interpreting Genesis, that wasn't a huge faith struggle for me because by that time I was in college. I was taking a lot of literature courses. I was at a Christian university. I actually had some good. Nowadays, you talk about going to a Christian university, it doesn't necessarily mean that your professors are going to be helpful for your faith, unfortunately. But one of the things that I found helpful is I was taking what I was learning about literature and how poetry and that sort of thing worked, and seeing some things in the Bible, realizing that the Bible uses poetry and that sort of thing. And I wasn't one of these people that, Genesis is poetry, so none of it's literal. I didn't go down that path because so much of Genesis really strikes me as God's really giving us some facts about life. But there was a flexibility as I came to some of the particulars in Genesis. So for me, it wasn't a make or break faith issue, for instance, whether the earth was 6,000 years old or much longer. I could see how a particular reading of Genesis, might account for either possibility. So it wasn't a real concern of mine. And even the possibility that evolution was true wasn't a big concern of mine. One of the reasons for that was I had a brother-in-law who was a medical, he was in med school. He was really committed to mission work. He's a very faithful Christian. And he himself, as he was exploring and wrestling with evolutionary theory, he had some professors that said, you know what, God wanted to do it that way. He could have done it that way. And so he actually started exploring evolution with a pretty open mind. He's like, I believe God did it, but maybe he used evolution. Well, as he dug further and further into it with an open mind, he didn't really even ask around. He wasn't going to try to go into being a PhD in biology, where there would have been enormous pressure for him to accept the kind of full Darwinian story. He was going into med school. There might have been a little pressure, but he just kind of went into it with an open mind. But as he explored it, he came to realize that the case for blind, unguided evolution of all life was extraordinarily weak, and that there was a lot of bluffing involved. And so he recommended a couple of books to me, and I read those. And that started my journey of being quite skeptical of modern evolutionary theory, even if there are certain elements of it. Yeah, polar bears probably did evolve from brown bears, microevolution. But the big picture of mindless, unguided evolution, microbe to man, it just, for me, it fell apart on the evidence. So while that wasn't a make or break issue for my faith, once I saw that evolution had failed, it actually became another source of strength for my faith. Because if evolutionary theory fails, you're out of luck as an atheist. Richard Dawkins, the famous evolutionary biologist, public atheist, he put it this way once: Darwin and his theory of evolution made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. I think he was exaggerating, but his point is, you need evolutionary theory to be an atheist that can in any way kind of have a leg to stand on, because you've got to explain the extraordinary intricacy of the living world. of animals and plants, of the molecular machinery we're discovering in cells. You've got to have some other explanation than a designer. And if that fails, there's really no other game in town other than a creator. So anyway, I was a professor for a while, and eventually started working for the Discovery Institute, where it's kind of the hub of the intelligent design movement. And so that's allowed me to bring both a kind of a literary aesthetic, because my focus was literature, aesthetics, that sort of thing. And then, of course, working at Discovery Institute in intelligent design, helping edit books, co-author some books. I'm rubbing shoulders with some brilliant scientists. So I had this rare opportunity to be very cross-disciplinary. So that's been really exciting.
Yeah, and that's really one of the uniquenesses of this conversation and of the book that we want to talk about, is just how close and how intertwined those worlds are, particularly the world of literature, the world of the humanities, the world of history, the world of theology, and how those and the natural sciences are actually deeply, deeply woven together. And that's one of the things that drew me for this conversation and to this particular work of yours. But before we get into that, well, maybe it's related to that. One of the things you say early on in the book is that this book that you've written, A Meaningful World, and we'll get to the subtitle in just a second, but you describe it as an antidote. And you mentioned a couple of the big names in science that really seem to have dominated the conversation for somewhere around 100 to 150 years, starting with Darwin, and then the presence of Sigmund Freud in the early part of the 20th century. And now this group represented by Richard Dawkins, oftentimes referred to as the new atheists, who really came into prominence, triggered in some way possibly by the events of 9/11 in 2001. And then you had the kind of meteoric rise of the voices of these atheistic scientists, of Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Peter Singer, a number of others, who became very aggressive, very militant in their approach of atheistic materialism, naturalism. I think it was Christopher Hitchens who went so far as to say that religion is a virus on the hardware of humanity and that needs to be eradicated. We've talked about that some here at the Denison Forum. But it really does, you can see it in popular culture. You can see it in movies. You can see it in other aspects of culture, that it's almost a given that from Darwin to Dawkins, they've been largely unquestioned in a lot of ways for around 100 or so years in our culture. Why do you think that is? How do you think we got to that kind of milieu that we're operating in today?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a very complex question. I think there are a lot of threads. I would say that Darwin's theory of evolution, while it falls apart on close scrutiny, it was maybe the first to offer at least a superficially plausible explanation for the origin of, all these amazing plants and animals we have around us that didn't invoke a creator. And there were forces already in place in Western society that were eager to move toward atheistic or at least agnostic point of view culturally. Huxley, he formed the X Club, a friend of Darwin's. He wasn't even fully convinced by Darwin's theory. He thought natural selection was too restrictive. If you had to build things using natural selection, he didn't see how it would work. But he didn't see any other game in town, and he had this program of wanting to move culture away from Judeo-Christian religion, kind of free it, of the shackles of religion. And so he glommed on to Darwin's theory, even though he didn't see it as completely credible, and became a very effective proponent of it. He was called Darwin's bulldog, famously. He was a pretty effective debater. And so I think there were just a lot of forces that wanted something like that. And then, how did they kind of march through the institutions? That's, I think it was Antonio Gramsci. I may be misremembering his name, but he was a Frankfurt School Marxist who talked about the need to move through the institutions of Western culture rather than just say, let's try to take over the government. He said, you need to move through the universities. You need to move through even if you can get into the seminaries, do that. And so that's been a very aggressive program. And to some degree, maybe Christians were kind of asleep at the wheel. We wanted to, baptize people. We wanted to, convert people. We wanted to tell people about Jesus, which is absolutely crucial and important. But, I think too many of us forgot that I think it was Abraham Kuyper, that said there's not one square inch of all of creation about which God does not cry, mine. And so I think there's been a wake-up call for Christians and other theists of goodwill that we need to be more proactive about culture generally. Do we have Christians in Hollywood? Do we have Christians writing novels? Do we have Christians that aren't just running for office, but are, trying to shape how we think about politics and political economy? And so I think that's the good news. I think there's kind of a wake-up call that we need to be proactive across culture. We need to be salt and light in many areas and not just inside the church building.
Yeah, and even just yesterday, I sat down after work with my wife, and she started reading to me the testimony of a popular Hollywood figure, someone that everybody would recognize, and started sharing the story of his faith that was published in a recent magazine, and just becoming aware that there is no environment where Christians are excluded or should be excluded. And as you said, a great wake-up call. I'd like to also ask you to comment, just reframing history a little bit. Like I said, if you know Dawkins coming in the latter half, particularly in his influence in the latter part of the 19th century, but if you take a longer look, I had a part of my conversation with your colleague Stephen Meyer about this, that really the modern scientific movement, even the scientific method that is so predominant in the fields of science today, if you go back 500 years, you find out that the modern scientific movement that started around the 1500s was actually initiated by very dedicated Christian people who were wanting to discover more about the majesty of God through what God has created and what God has enabled us to discover. Can you kind of reframe that conversation of history and remind us of that?
Absolutely, yeah. That's just a wonderful story. And there was a period where I was working for another think tank that has some overlap with Discovery Institute, and we did a documentary called "The Birth of Freedom" that talked about the Judeo-Christian influence on the rise of the good things in Western culture. Obviously, since Western civilization is run by humans and humans are fallen sinners, there's been all kinds of atrocities. But if you compare Western civilization, its rise compared to every other major civilization in history, they did amazing things. And the birth of science is one of the things we cover there. So that I would recommend that as a good introduction. If you're like, I don't have time to read a book, well, The Birth of Freedom. It also looks at the rise of representative government, the rise of economic freedom, and how many people that's managed to lift out of poverty globally. But yeah, those guys, they, to a man, they were Christians. There might have been some that were, kind of theists, maybe not like Newton may have been not a completely orthodox Trinitarian, but to a man, they were all theists who believed in a rational, loving God who created the world, and humans are made in his image. And so those two things combined meant, hey, we could go and study nature carefully and uncover the hidden depths. We talk about nature being a work of genius in our book, A Meaningful World. And we say that there's these different qualities. I'm getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here, but one of those is depth. There's a depth to any work of genius. You don't just, read Shakespeare's Hamlet once, I got it all. Or go to a really great, deep film. I got it all in the first try. No, there's depths and depths and layers to it. They saw nature as a work of supreme genius, so they expected there to be hidden depths, mysterious things that wouldn't immediately reveal themselves to them, but because they're made in the image of the Creator, they thought, hey, if we study it carefully, maybe we can uncover some of that hidden order. They also believe that God, because he's rational, that maybe there's a hidden elegance there. And so Kepler, he was one of the famous early astronomers who one of his discoveries, pretty much cinched the case for a heliocentric model of the solar system. For a long time, practically everybody thought the sun went around the Earth and everything went around the Earth. But Copernicus first and Galileo argued, no, the sun's at the center of the solar system. And Kepler, he came up with these 3 laws of planetary motion, and he seized upon the ellipses as the shape of the rotation instead of a perfect circle. Some people say, well, the ellipses, that's kind of messy. That's not as elegant as a perfect circle. But he stumbled, and he was searching for it, upon this very elegant mathematical formula to describe those orbits. And he said, and this is a paraphrase, when he made this discovery, I was thinking God's thoughts after him. And so what is he talking about? He's thinking God. Well, he thought of God as a mathematician. He thought there would be an elegance to God's creation. You look out with your eyes and you see a lot of messiness, death and decay, and manure turns into soil and worms going. There's a lot of messy stuff. But he said there's got to also be, in addition to all that complexity and depth, I'm thinking there's probably some hidden elegance there, some order. If we can do mathematics as humans, think how much more of a mathematician God is. So they went looking for that hidden mathematical order, and they found it. So that's one of the spectacular stories of the history of science. And it flips on its head the kind of modern myth that Christianity is somehow opposed to science. So Christianity is the soil in which science was born.
Right. And that Christianity in particular has no fear of science. It actually celebrates it, as you said, because it's the discovery of God, the thinking of God's thoughts after him. And to see that thread, to me, it's just really the importance of a larger, better reading of history rather than kind of the soundbite type approach that we take to so many things in our world today. And it really gave the foothold to the new atheists, to the Dawkins and the Hitchens of the world, to really mischaracterize faith broadly and Christianity specifically. But let's go back a little bit to the title of the...
Just quick to kind of put a knot on that. Our quarrel isn't with science. That's a search for truth about the natural world. Our quarrel is with scientism, which is this philosophy that dresses itself up as just truth-seeking science, but it's really a philosophy. It's an atheistic, materialistic philosophy posing as objective search for truth about nature.
Would you? Thanks for bringing up that term. That's an important term in this conversation, and a distinction that people need to be aware of: the difference between legitimate science and scientific pursuit, and that of scientism as what might even be described, or would you describe it as a false religion, an idolatry in the context of a Christian terminology?
Exactly,
Would you put it in in that context?
Yeah, because it's not just a way of kind of looking at the world. It is a substitute religion. You think science is going to solve everything, and it's not just any kind of science. It's science yoked to materialism, to this idea that ultimately all there is matter and energy. Your soul isn't real. The idea of an immaterial creator isn't real. Love, that's just glands, chemistry. There's not anything authentic there. Good and evil, those are just constructs. So scientism has a materialistic, philosophical, ideological substructure, and it's a substitute religion.
Let me get you to chase a rabbit with me on that topic for just a second, and that is, do you think that the shared experience that we all had over the last 3.5 years relative to COVID and the COVID pandemic, there was oftentimes this clarion call and then criticism of, well, just trust the science, just trust the science. Do you think the ideology of scientism has taken a hit and a step backward because of the journey through the pandemic, and that the world was grappling with something that we had long talked about as a possibility, but now it was upon us, and science couldn't readily and quickly explain it and solve it. Do you think that's kind of hurt the movement of scientism or affected it in any way?
I hope that it has caused a lot of people to realize just because somebody in a white lab coat or the head of some, scientific branch of government science says that what is really happening is a particular fallible human being is saying, here's what I think. And rather than carefully lay out the evidence in front of you, I'm going to make a appeal to authority, and that should raise our baloney detector. Why is he making this questionable appeal to authority if he can just trot out really powerful evidence for what he's saying? And so, we saw a lot of flip flopping that I think it should be educational. That we need to be not be led around by the nose by somebody just claiming scientific authority.
Right, and one of the healthy signs of a healthy person and a healthy scientist, for that matter, would be someone who says that it's okay to say, I don't know. There just were times when all scientists need to be able to say that with the proper kind of humility, and especially when something of the nature of a hopefully once in a lifetime, once in a millennium global pandemic, that we can say, you know what, there was just a lot we didn't know, and now we know a lot more, but we don't know everything that we would like to know. And that's always the journey of what life and science is all about. Let's go back to the book a minute. The book is titled A Meaningful World, and then the subtitle, How the Arts and Science Reveal the Genius of Nature. Give us the backstory of what prompted you to write this book in the first place.
Great question. I was working at the Discovery Institute's Center for Science and Culture. That's the hub of the intelligent design movement. And so that's some important context, because the theory of intelligent design, in a nutshell, it says that there are things in nature that carry a clear mark of having been created by a designing intelligence. In other words, they didn't happen by some law like magnetism or something random like floods or earthquakes or tornadoes. That there was a planning, forethinking designer at work putting that together. So certain things in nature, it could be the molecular outboard motor we call the bacterial flagellum, that Michael B. makes a really powerful argument. It has the earmark of design. It could be the fine-tuning of the laws and constants of physics and chemistry for life. That's such a problem for atheists that the name for that issue in physics is the fine-tuning problem. They just call it the fine-tuning. Well, it's not a problem to a theist, but to some people it's a problem, because why would gravity and all these other be just right to allow for stars and planets to form and hundreds of other ways? Steve Meyer probably got into that a little bit when you talk to him. You can find his stuff online or get his book, The Return to the God Hypothesis. He goes into depth about that. And many Nobel laureates have said fine-tuning points to a designer. So intelligence, right? That's where ID kind of stops. Says, look, there's a designing intelligence. But we said, Ben Weicker and I said, we don't just have a uniform experience of what intelligent agents can do and can't do, and what an intelligent agent can do beyond what, say, a tornado can do. We have uniform and a rich experience of what geniuses can do, a higher form of intelligence. And since I had a background in the arts, and Ben Weicker had some background in that as well, as he's also a kind of jack of all trades, shameless generalist like myself. We said, let's look at some of the iconic works of genius in Western civilization, see if we find some common themes, characteristics, and then go back into nature and see if we find those. And so we did. We found some common characteristics. We boiled it down to 4, and then we show how, whether you're looking at chemistry, we're looking at cosmology, whether you're looking at biology, we find these characteristics of genius. So we kind of took it to the next level, if you will. Took the intelligent design argument to the next level.
My name is Lori Morrow from Fairview, Texas, and I'm a proud supporter of Denison Forum. I support Denison Forum because of the genuine spiritual impact it has made on my life, and I want that same impact to be multiplied in countless souls across the globe. To join me in making it possible for the continued creation of these necessary resources and to get them in the hands of millions more people, please visit denisonforum.org to give today.
Denison Forum is a nonprofit ministry made possible by many generous donors. My name is Roy Bailey from Dallas, Texas, and I'm a proud supporter of Denison Forum. I personally use Denison Forum in about 3 different ways. I use it daily during my quiet time. I use it to share with family, friends, and people that I'm witnessing to as well. And I read excerpts regularly from it in our weekly Bible study, which we have as a nationwide Bible study via Zoom. I support Denison Forum because of the genuine spiritual impact it has made on my life, and I want that same impact to be multiplied in countless souls across the globe. To join me in making the continued creation of these resources possible and to help get it into the hands of millions more people, visit denisonforum.org to give today.
Let's go down a couple of those roads, because just to kind of give people a framework of what this book and this conversation is about. It might be expected by people to say how science reveals the genius of nature, but the combination of art and science as the revelation of genius, of this higher level of learning that points to the ultimate level of knowledge and understanding that we would find and place in God. And let me just kind of set a little bit of a framework for this part of our conversation. Is this, it just kind of startled me when I went from the title into the first part of the book, and the whole discussion about how Hamlet, as this exquisite piece of literature, actually more, I think the book quotes what you say in there is, Hamlet has been more studied than any other piece of literature except for the Bible.
That's right. Yeah, it's extraordinary how much.
It is extraordinary for me just to hear that. But just to go back in and to say, okay, as an expression of something that we find in the world and in the human endeavor, to find something of this quality, of this magnitude, and of this, as you said, depth and exquisite nature, how does that point us and reveal these principles of genius that point ultimately back to God?
Yeah, that's so. When we use Shakespeare, we could have gone to lots of different places as examples, but we had to get it all in one book, and so we mainly focused on a couple of plays by Shakespeare, and then just kind of briefly, pointed to some other works of genius that also illustrated these points. But Hamlet's where we start, and we show it illustrating these 4 characteristics that we boil down of genius. There's works of genius have a depth to them. You don't just read it once or go look at an amazing genius painting and just, oh yeah, I get it, I'm done. There's layers and layers of meaning and beauty there that if you keep studying it, there's a harmony to it. Harmony involves the artful relationship among a variety of parts, a diversity brought into happy association, if you will. The easiest example is musical harmony. When you get 4 different parts and they're all blending together, it's a beautiful thing. When they don't blend together, it's a scary thing. Then in Shakespeare, what does a play by Shakespeare have to do with harmony? Well, he brings these very disparate elements into harmony. There's comic elements in Hamlet. And of course, it's a tragedy, so as you expect, there's tragic elements. There's elevated language. There's very earthy language, sometimes even body. But these elements are not just, I'm getting tired of the dark parts, let's have some fun. Let's go over here and have a little body. Let's have some elevated language. Those different aspects, they interpenetrate, they strengthen each other. It's kind of a 2 + 2 is 5 kind of thing. So there's this rich harmony there. Then the elegance. There's an elegance in the play, and I won't go into depth there, but you can see elegance in certain types of poems where the rhyme scheme just fits neatly together. In nature, we see elegance, and I've already kind of alluded to this with Kepler's 3 laws of motion. Everybody's familiar, even if not 1 in 100 people understand it, with Einstein's special theory of relativity, E equals mc squared. I mean, isn't it extraordinary that there's this far-reaching, probing insight into physics that can be so compactly expressed? So elegance, it's the emphasis there on bringing of a unity out of something complicated. So we see that in Shakespeare. We also see clarity, and clarity isn't like newspaper, like a good newspaper. It's very clear and easy to read. That's not what we mean by clarity. Clarity comes from the Latin clarus. It means bright, shining, illustrious, evident. Let me give an example that probably most people on this radio show are familiar with. The 23rd Psalm by David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures, et cetera, et cetera. This beautiful psalm. Well, why did he use all these metaphors? And, it's going to be hard for like a 10-year-old kid to get it, because he doesn't know about shepherding, and metaphors can throw him off. Why didn't David say, the Lord takes good care of me? He'll give me everything I need. Water and other stuff. He'll always be there for me, even in tough times. That's clear. Well, it's clear, but there's no radiance to it. There's no the power, the shining, illustrious quality is gone from it. And so works of genius have that clarity, that radiance about them. So then we took those 4: depth, clarity, harmony, elegance, and we said, okay, now let's turn to nature and find those. And of course, I've already mentioned how the founders of science, they expected depth, they expected elegance, and they went and found them. Another great example is this Russian chemist from the 19th century, Mendeleev. They were starting to build the periodic table of elements that probably gave a lot of us nightmares when we were forced to learn it, and others dreams, and fell in love with it. The few of us that really got into chemistry.
I can still see it. I can still see it on the wall of my 7th grade chemistry class. Yeah.
First I was no, but once you start to get it, even if you don't get all the depths of it, it's like, wow, there's an order, there's a pattern to it. Those columns aren't just kind of random. Oh, let's put them all up here, and we got to put it on a poster, and so we'll kind of make it rectangular. You notice how it's not quite everything's even. Well, those columns, the elements in those columns tend to share characteristics. I mean, they're each distinct. They share characteristics. And what Mendeleev did is somebody before him, John Newlands, said, I wonder if there's a pattern, an octave pattern, like every 8th element repeats and has something in common. Maybe, but then it didn't quite fit, and never mind, I give up on that. But Mendeleev, who was a theist, believed in a wise creator, he said, no, I think there's something here. I think there is a pattern. I think this law of octaves may be real. And so he stuck to his guns, and he said, you know what? If this law of octaves is real, there should be an element here that's missing that we haven't found yet. And over here, there should be one that's missing that should fit in this column. Which is how's that doing science? It's kind of weird. It's not usually it's totally you gather evidence and you experiment and you have observations and then you come to conclusions. Well, he was doing some of that, but he also had this idea that God, the creator of the periodic table of elements, was an orderly God, and there had to be some hidden order. And he stuck to his guns, and because of that, they started turning up the missing elements. Gallium in 1875 was the first, and it fit. It was like a puzzle. It fit right in where he predicted it would be. So that's just one of many examples of how scientists, seeing nature as a work of genius, went out, had that framework, and it helped them do science better. So we go through the book and look at different areas and look at that, whether it's depth, harmony, And that's, since we've written it, we could do it afterwards now, particularly in biology, where we said we thought we'd given you a good taste of the depths of biology and biochemistry. We were just getting warmed up because of the last 15 years. They're discovering things like in DNA, you'll get stretches of DNA and you can move it over to a slightly different reading frame, and it'll create it'll have some other function. And you can read it backwards and forwards, and it'll have two different functions. So imagine a written human code that, I've read it front ways, now I'm going to read this section backwards, and it has a really important meaning too. And or software that did that sort of thing. So it's just off the charts ingenious stuff that they're discovering.
Yeah. So let me get you to define a couple of terms, and then I got another question for you. But just so I know that I'm on the same page with you, give me the working definition of how you're using the word genius.
Yeah, genius would be artistic genius. Well, genius would just be is loosely termed as somebody that's really brilliant, but it really has a little bit more formal definition in both when you think of artistic genius and scientific genius, of doing something deeply original as well as extremely difficult, and that requires a lot of intelligence. So you might have somebody that's brilliant, but if they're not creating something new, they're not having a breakthrough in the stricter sense of the word genius, you wouldn't call them a genius. So Einstein was a genius because he had this extraordinary breakthrough. There might be somebody with a higher IQ that could score a little higher on an IQ test than Einstein, but that IQ test wouldn't make him a genius in this narrow sense of the word. It would be these people that have this ability to make these great creative leaps. So Shakespeare is a genius because of the creative, just distinct way that he did his plays. But then, of course, there was also a greatness to the artistry. It wasn't just that they were different, distinct, fresh.
Okay, so if I follow you correctly, then these qualities, particularly these four qualities of genius, as we find them reflected in any part of our created world, become reflections of God as the ultimate genius.
Yeah, the ultimate genius. Yes. And they help, and they also help us grapple with some things, because when you approach a work of genius, if you do it with the right mindset, like when I first came to Shakespeare in high school, I didn't get all that. The language is 400 years old. It's like being thrown on a black diamond ski slope, and hey, is this fun? And you've never skied before. No, it's not fun. It's scary and weird, and I don't know what's going on. For a lot of us, that's our experience of Shakespeare in high school. We dip in 2 or 3 weeks, assume that kids can pick up 400-year-old English, and if not, they're stupid. Which it's almost a foreign language at this point. But if you stick with it and you have surely all these people down through the ages that have found this amazing depths and riches in Shakespeare. If I stick with it, and you have some aptitude, some people are good at different things. Then you're going to uncover some amazing stuff there, and it's going to start clicking, and you're going to go, oh, I see why he did this, or why he didn't just use the simpler way of saying this. Or when you come to poetry in the Bible, oh, I see why all this poetic language that made me scratch my head at first. I see now what the writer was up to. So you bring that patience, that humility to the work, and it can make all the difference. It's the same with when we come to nature. Like, why does the earth have to have earthquakes? If God were a loving, good God, he wouldn't have any earthquakes. Well, maybe, but maybe God has purposes and reasons that we don't know about. And scientists, by the way, have discovered some purposes. We can circle back to that in a little bit if you want. Purposes for our active geology that leads to earthquakes. And then there's theological answers to that too. Why doesn't God make our lives completely free of suffering and challenges? Would that really be good for us, fallen creatures? I mean, there's a reason he had Adam and Eve leave the Garden of Eden after they sinned. It wasn't just because he was grumpy at them. He knew that having everything, easy street for people that were fallen and sinful was not what was best for them. I digress a little bit, but when you think, hey, this is a genius, I need to approach it humbly, rather than I'm smarter and better and wiser, and what's this idiot doing? Bring that humility to it. You're going to learn more. You're going to discover things. It's going to be a more joyful interesting journey.
Right. And as a process of revelation, I just, it's hard to have this conversation not be from my chair thinking about Romans 1 and what Romans 1 tells us about the reality of God being revealed on so many, all levels of life. And that the reality of it is that we're bumping into expressions and reflections of God's genius all the time.
Even without science.
And we may not appreciate them. And as you are kind of walking through these qualities, it makes me think along these lines of, when you read a great novel or you see a great work of film, I think of a couple of Stephen King films that come to mind actually when I think about depth. And I'm like, oh, wow, if I go back and think about that movie again, or I think about that novel again, or I go back and watch that movie again, I'm like, oh, I didn't see that before. And that idea of depth and layer is in there as it pertains to a great story. If you talk about harmony and as like you said, we probably almost resonate with that one quickly because of, we know when a piece of music is not done in harmony, it's painful to our ears, and we're like, oh, that's just not good music. I just don't want to be around that. That's not good music. It doesn't sound right, because we have this internal sense of what harmony and the intersection of harmony might look like. Clarity, your example about the 23rd Psalm is really helpful. I got to tell you, Dr. Witt, the one I'm struggling with a little bit is elegance, is wrapping my understanding around this quality of elegance as an expression of beauty, as an expression of genius. Can you unpack that one just a little bit more for me? Is it simply unity, or is it more than unity?
Yeah, that was when we formulated these, I was struggling a little bit. How do we distinguish harmony and elegance? Because they're so closely related. I finally, told Ben, I think they're really two, you're coming at the same thing from two different angles, and it's kind of the emphasis is more. So elegance is a type of harmony, but the emphasis is on a very compact unity among a diversity. So, I gave the example of, you've got all these planets coming around the sun, right? And they've got different orbits, and some are out far and near, and they're not all exactly on the same plane, though they're very close to the same plane, interestingly. But then Kepler comes up with these laws, these three very elegant laws that describe all that diversity. And so that would be an example of elegance. We see in nature, are you familiar with the Fibonacci number?
Yes, a little bit.
There's this Fibonacci number. The number is, I can't remember how, it's like you get it by adding the last two numbers. 1 plus 2 is 3. 2 plus 3 is 5. 3 plus 5 is 8. Anyway, then there's this number that comes out of that, a ratio. And we see that the golden rectangle uses the Fibonacci number. We see spirals all through nature that use this Fibonacci number, the shell of a nautilus, the spiral of galaxies, the number of seeds in sunflowers. They'll have a Fibonacci number. It might be one, or it might be a bigger sunflower, but it's always going to have this Fibonacci number, or almost always. Just hundreds of examples. So that would be an example of elegance in nature, where wow, all of a sudden there's this Fibonacci number cropping up all over nature. Eugene Wigner, he was a scientist and thinker, and he talked about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics for the natural sciences. And that's just like the fine-tuning problem. It's only unreasonable if there's not a God in heaven, if there's not a creator. But if the creator God is a master mathematician, and when he was creating this elegant universe, and there's a documentary, by the way, called The Elegant Universe. I don't think the people that made it were believers, but they see the elegance in nature. So you find that mathematical elegance cropping up all over the place.
So talk about that. I'm glad you brought up math, because I'm sitting here imagining, my young granddaughter learning her numbers, and eventually learning her mathematical or multiplication tables and ultimately long division. I'm thinking about that kid that's encountering algebra or calculus for the first time. Have had some exposure to the English professor John Lennox, who is a world-renowned mathematician. It seems like so many things come back to the beauty and genius that is revealed in mathematics, and so many things, even theologically, that come back to a connection to and even an anchoring within mathematics. And if to the average person that may be listening to this, if you've ever had that joy of balancing and reconciling your checkbook and doing that regularly and having some problems with it and then figuring it out and the joy that comes through that, or if you're an accountant and you've ever drafted a budget for a company and then that budget actually worked itself out in real time and in real business, and then you were able to reconcile that you're touching on some of the genius of mathematics, not to mention the connection between mathematics and something like music. But can you touch upon how these qualities of genius particularly express themselves mathematically, not only what you were just talking about, but perhaps in other ways as well?
Well, let me back up a minute. I thought of an example of elegance in biology. Biology is often so sophisticated and complex. We don't. Elegance isn't usually the term. It's like dizzying sophistication or something like that. But when Watson and Crick were trying to discover the structure of the DNA molecule, they implicitly, even though I don't think either of those guys at the time were believers, but they inherited this cultural heritage of theistic science that said, look for elegance, look for harmony, look for depth. And they would reject that as they kept do these toy models of what they thought the DNA molecule shaped like, and kept comparing it with what little bit of microscopic evidence they were able to glean at the time. And they would reject possibilities that were too kludgy, too inelegant. And when they finally hit upon that, they got a view of an X-ray crystallography image by a female scientist in another lab. That's a different story where they misbehaved a little bit there. But then, of course, that other lab couldn't figure it out from that. At least at that moment, they could. Maybe if they'd had longer. But Watson and Crick took it back and they looked at it, and there was this kind of cross thing, and they came up with. They said, "What about a double helix? Like take a picture a ladder that's twisted, and so that gives you this double helical structure." It says, "What if that was it?" And that would also kind of help explain how DNA copies, because the two parts could come apart and then they could attach, and it would of course be very sophisticated to copy, but at least we'd have the first inkling of how that might be happening. But it was the elegance of it that was a big part of what caught their attention. To say, let's double down and explore that option. So anyway, but do you ask about mathematics and music? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Well, and just how mathematics is so much an expression of genius. And in across multiple areas. So
one of my weakest areas in terms of expertise is music, but as probably anybody knows, even if you're not a musician, you know that music theory is just rife with mathematics, and you get the different octaves by you can take a string that's wire and you loop it in two and then half it, and you get roughly an octave, and that C note and then a C note later, they sound good together. There's something common about them, and then that's just the tip of the iceberg about how mathematical music theory is. Most people who are really good at music that just pick it up, they may not even know math, but there's mathematics, richly under that. And of course, chemistry is rife with mathematics. Physics is almost all mathematics at this point. Even before Einstein, Isaac Newton's his great landmark work was just rich in mathematical equations, cosmology, mathematics, understanding thermodynamics, the different laws of thermodynamics, which is now helping us understand things like blood flow and how different things in the body work. One book I'd recommend if you're really you're not as into kind of arts and sciences, but you're like, I like biology and the human. There's a book called Your Design Body that's written by a physician and a systems engineer, and they take a systems engineering perspective to the body, and there's so much harmony there. It's unbelievable, and in places elegance, but the harmony of these interacting systems, and some of that, some of the breakthroughs in understanding how fine-tuned the human body goes back to, it requires a mathematical analysis, how certain things are being kept in these very narrow ranges, some of the chemicals in our body and why they need to be kept in those narrow ranges. So, mathematics is indispensable to so many fields of science.
Yeah, it just makes me think, if you've ever gotten the lab report from your doctor at an annual physical, how did they come up with these ranges that, all these things in your body needed to be within this number and that number. And,
right.
And when they're not, then they start looking for causes and problems.
This book I mentioned, of course, I want you to go out and buy my book. But if you buy a second book, after you bought A Meaningful World by Jonathan Witt and Ben Weicker, take a look, if you're interested in human biology, at this book, Your Design Body. They go through, and we take a lot of these for granted. Oh yeah, my phosphate level, or whatever, my iron level's in the right zone. Of course it is. No, your body has to be doing all these ingenious things to keep all of those at just the right level. Even a cell, you think, a cell's got X amount of stuff in it, and it's got these ratios. Well, on the outside of the cell, the ratios are completely different. So how is it maintaining these very different ratios that it needs to? Homeostasis is the word. If it loses homeostasis, it becomes like its environment. When you become like your environment, you become dead. When you die, your body, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. All that hardworking, ingenious stuff that's maintaining homeostasis between the individual cells, all the different organs of the body, that quits, and it starts to, return to room temperature, and in a whole lot of other ways, like the environment. It's that genius of our designed bodies that keeps it going as long as it does.
Just fascinating. I just feel like I could continue to just ask questions all day long. But as we get ready to wrap up and just kind of think, I want to go back to what your colleague Stephen Meyer was talking about, and what you referenced a little while ago about earthquakes and other things like earthquakes within our experience. Dr. Meyer alluded in our conversation to how we might understand the presence of miracles as they're described in the Bible, as they're described in the life and work of Jesus. And he said, perhaps a better way for us to understand those kinds of things in answer to Dawkins and others would be that if we accept the idea of God, and then we accept his ability to intervene in his creation, that those expressions of miracle are not really the interruption of physical laws and the way things normally operate. They're actually a glimpse of the restoration of them. That when, just for instance, Jesus healed a person, he was not interrupting natural processes as much as he was picturing the resetting of them the way they should ultimately always be, and we would go on to say will be in the kingdom of God.
That's beautiful.
Talk about that from the standpoint of, okay, how is that possibly a reflection and an expression or an answer to the presence of things, this common idea of, well, if there is a God, and if he is a genius, and if he is good, then how can he let things like a pandemic, how can he let things like cancer, how can he let things like a hurricane or an earthquake happen? How might we think about those things in a cohesive, reasonable way?
Yeah, I think you come at it at two levels. One is scientifically, some of the things that have been pointed to as that's pointless. It has no, like earthquakes, that's pointless. Well, it turns out our active geology is crucial to our Earth being livable and habitable over thousands and millions of years. The way the plate tectonics, continental shelves recirculate things. And there's a great book called I'm trying to think of The Wonder of Water, where Michael Denton, an Australian geneticist, gets into all the ways that active geology, including water and all the ways water is done, help us. So that's one example. You talk about Richard Dawkins complain, well, a wise God wouldn't have made the human eye the way it is. It's backwardly wired, and we've got a tiny little blind spot in our eye. Most of us aren't even aware of the blind spot. It's so tiny and easy to ignore. But as it turns out, there's good engineering reasons for the quote unquote backward wiring of the eye that Dawkins just ignored because he was so quick to jump on and critique the wiring of the eye. It improves oxygen flow, so it ultimately improves visual acuity. And so, engineers get this very quickly, that they know that any kind of complex system, there's going to be trade-offs, and you can't have the sports car, the best sports car in the world that's also got the most hauling capacity. You're going to need a pickup for that. So there's trade-offs. So he ignores all that, and he found something he didn't quite understand, and he jumped on it and criticized it. Whereas if he'd said, maybe there's a reason for that. Now, so that's the scientific, be humble. Maybe there's a reason for it. Then you get things like, well, what about diseases where little kids, die or they go blind? And that just seems terrible. And it is. But then you have to realize you're also asking a theological question when you say, why would a good God allow suffering and pain and death? And some people unfairly, they ask a theological question, but then they won't allow a theological answer. They won't allow you to say, okay, you're asking about God and his nature. Well, God has revealed himself to us through his word, through his son, Jesus, and he's given us resources to understand why a good God might allow suffering. It has to do with, and it's not a simple answer, but it has to do with he made free creatures. He made humans free. They fell into sin. There's indications he made angels free, and some of them fell. It seems to be the source of Satan and all the mischief he's sowed in the world. He knows our hearts. I talked about earlier about Adam and Eve being kicked out of the garden. It wasn't just because God was huffy because they took some of his fruit off his tree. He knew that to restore them, they had to enter into suffering and be challenged and be humbled so that he could bless them in a greater way. But those are theological answers. Of course, there's you could have many shows probing and plumbing those. My main point here is people that ask good theological questions, they're ones we should all wrestle with and concern ourselves with, should though be willing to hear theological answers, should be willing to go to that mode of knowledge to get answers. And it's that scientism, that false philosophy that asks a theological question, says, I don't want to hear a theological answer.
No, they want to skip categories at times.
Yeah. I'm thinking science is going to solve everything, and if you can't solve, well, that proves that there's no God. No, that's not good logic.
Right. Dr. Witt, thank you. It's such a fascinating conversation and such an important, insightful, and yes, challenging book. A Meaningful World: How the Arts and Science Reveal the Genius of Nature. Would encourage our audience to pick that up and other work that you've done. If they want to track and follow more of what you are doing these days, where can they find you besides the bookstore?
Yeah, I would go to discovery.org. That's Discovery Institute. And you'll see a section for intelligent design. You can go to the fellows there. You'll find my page under the senior fellows there. And then, of course, there's a lot of other great material, a lot of other great science. I talked about rubbing shoulders with some brilliant scientists. It's just been so exciting. Michael B., Jonathan Wells, Steve Meyer, others. So it's just a great resource, discovery.org/ID.
All right. We'll put that in the show notes as well. And just want to thank you, but also thank our audience for being a part of the conversation today. If this has been helpful to you, please rate, review us on your podcast platform and share this with your friends, your family. Really a lot for us to think about, a lot for us to learn, and a lot for us to celebrate about the beautiful design and genius of God as it is revealed around us and in us and all around us. And again, Dr. Witt, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Mark.
Filtering through an endless stream of news is hard in today's truth-confused environment. That's why at Denison Forum, we produce content that equips believers by applying biblical wisdom to top headlines every day. If you enjoy the Denison Forum podcast, you won't want to miss out on our newsletter, The Daily Article. Each morning, we engage the significant stories and issues of the day with biblical truth. This 5-minute read is delivered straight to your inbox at no cost and will help you stay informed and hopeful as you start your day. And as a podcast listener, when you sign up today, we'll send you a free copy of one of our most popular ebooks, Respectfully, I Disagree. In the book, Dr. Jim Denison offers biblical insight on today's contentious culture and presents the promise of a better future, one in which we can disagree with respect and forge a culture of commonality and grace. Subscribe to the Daily Article newsletter now at dfpodcast.org to stay informed with news coverage from a Christian perspective, and we'll send you your free ebook copy of Respectfully, I Disagree. That's dfpodcast.org, or just click the link in the show notes.